There are some moments in life so small, so ordinary, that they barely leave a ripple on the surface of time. But every so often, hidden in the folds of these ordinary moments, is a spark, something so profound that it can change the course of a person's life forever. It was a gray Tuesday morning in the heart of the city. The skies were heavy with clouds, and the streets echoed with the murmurs of tired commuters, all rushing to their daily routines. Among them stood a 17-year-old boy named Kevin. His clothes were a little too big and worn at the cuffs, his shoes scuffed from months of overuse. But he stood tall, backpack slung over one shoulder, gripping a crumpled bus ticket in his hand like it was the most valuable thing he owned, because to Kevin, it was. He had saved for 2 weeks to buy that ticket, not because he was going somewhere special, but because he needed to get to the other side of the city for a job interview. A part-time job at a hardware store. Nothing glamorous, but it meant a few dollars an hour, which meant groceries on the table, maybe some spare change for school supplies. Kevin lived with his grandmother in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. She was old, frail, and surviving on a meager pension. Kevin had become the man of the house long before he ever understood what that meant. So when the bus pulled up and the doors hissed open, Kevin stepped forward with purpose. That one ticket was hope folded into paper. But just as he was about to climb aboard, he heard a sound. A soft, stifled sob. He turned and saw her. A woman, probably in her late 20s, standing off to the side. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to disappear into her oversized coat. Her eyes were red, lips trembling, and one hand clutched an empty purse. She wasn't begging. She wasn't speaking. Just standing there with silent desperation written all over her face. Something inside Kevin paused. He looked at his ticket, then at her, then back at the ticket, and in that one breath, in that fraction of a second, something shifted. He walked over to her, his heart pounding harder than it did when he thought about the interview. "Miss?" he asked, his voice uncertain. She looked up, startled. "Do you need to go somewhere?" She nodded slowly, too ashamed to speak. Kevin hesitated. He wanted to say something wise, something comforting, but all he managed was a soft, "Here," as he held out the ticket. Her eyes widened. "No, I can't. You need that." Kevin smiled, trying to hide the sting of giving up something so crucial. "It's okay," he said. "You look like you need it more." She tried to refuse, again, but Kevin gently pressed the ticket into her hand and stepped back. The bus driver called out impatiently, and she finally boarded, turning to look at him once more. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, hers full of tears and silent gratitude. The doors closed, and the bus rolled away, taking her with it. Kevin stood there for a while, unsure of what he had just done. Then he turned and began walking. He didn't know how he'd get to that interview now. He didn't know if he'd even make it, but his heart felt full in a way he couldn't explain. He never asked for her name. She never asked for his. And he never expected to see her again. What Kevin didn't know was that the woman on that bus wasn't just anyone. She wasn't homeless, nor was she without resources. She was running from something deeper, something that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with pain. And that one act of kindness, his simple gesture, was going to stay with her, echoing in her heart long after the bus reached its destination. As Kevin walked back home, the clouds finally let go, and a gentle rain began to fall. He didn't have a coat. He didn't have much of anything, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had done something that mattered. The next few weeks were hard. Kevin didn't get the job. He never even made it to the interview. But he kept moving, kept applying, kept studying. Every night. He helped his grandmother with dinner, tucked her in with a smile, and sat by the window, watching the world go by with quiet determination. Life didn't hand him many breaks. School was tough, especially when you're constantly tired and hungry. But Kevin never complained. His teachers noticed his effort, even if his grades didn't always reflect it. And his classmates, well, most ignored him. A few mocked his clothes. But Kevin had learned early on not to expect too much from others. He just focused on the goal. Graduate, get into college somehow, get a job that could support his grandmother, and maybe, just maybe, live a life where he didn't have to choose between food and bus fare. It wasn't until 3 years later that the past came crashing back into his life in the most unexpected way. It was a bright spring morning when he received a letter. Not an email, not a message, a real, handwritten letter, sealed in a crisp white envelope with his name written in elegant cursive. He opened it cautiously, curiosity overtaking caution. The letter read, "Dear Kevin, I don't know if you remember me, but I've never forgotten you. You gave me your bus ticket once when I had no one and nothing. You didn't ask for anything in return. You didn't even know my story. But your kindness stayed with me. And because of you, I found the courage to change my life. I've searched for you for a long time. I'm writing to tell you that your college tuition has been paid. In full. You deserve the chance to build the future you've dreamed of, with gratitude beyond words. L." Kevin dropped the letter. His hands shook. His heart pounded so loud he could barely hear the city outside. That one moment, that single act of kindness, it had come full circle. But who was she? And how had she found him? He didn't even know her name. The memory of the tear-streaked woman and the bus ticket never left Malik's mind. Even after days had turned to weeks, and weeks into months, he'd often find himself replaying the moment in his head. The heaviness in his chest was not from regret, but from an odd feeling he couldn't quite name, as though he had unknowingly placed a bet on destiny. Life had gone on, school had ended, and just like many others in his neighborhood, Malik found himself standing at the edge of a cliff called adulthood with no parachute. He applied for dozens of jobs, janitorial work, warehouse lifting, grocery bagging, but found the doors either slammed shut or creaked open just long enough to push him back out. He was too young, too inexperienced, too unqualified. The dream of college had been his anchor, but the world around him had very little sympathy for anchors when the ship itself was sinking. His mother, fragile and weary from working 2 shifts at the textile plant, had always believed he'd do something special. She'd say, "You're not meant for these narrow streets, Malik. You got the mind and heart for the skies." But dreams cost money. Tuition forms, recommendation letters, application fees, all words that translated to digits his mother couldn't afford. Malik took a job delivering groceries on his bike. The pay was meager, but it gave him something far more valuable: time to think. While he rode across the city, his mind wandered to books he once borrowed from the public library. Stories of great men who started with nothing, who walked for miles just to attend school, who sold fruit on street corners and one day stood behind podiums wearing gowns of honor. He wasn't delusional. He knew the odds. But he also knew that maybe, just maybe, he had one miracle tucked in his pocket, waiting to unfold. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the row of rusted roofs and telephone poles, Malik returned home, to find his mother sitting at the table with her head in her hands. The envelope in front of her was thick and unfamiliar. His heart sank. "Ma, what is it?" She looked up, eyes red and glassy, but behind that sorrow was something else. Confusion. "This came in the mail today. It's for you." He took the envelope cautiously. The paper was high quality, embossed with a gold seal. He opened it slowly, expecting a rejection, or worse, a debt notice from the last hospital visit. But instead, what fell out was a letter. Typed, neatly folded, accompanied by another paper, a full scholarship offer. His hands trembled as he read. "Dear Malik, you don't know me, but a few years ago you did something kind for someone who was at her lowest. You gave away something small, a bus ticket, but to the one who received it, it was everything. That woman was me. That night, your act of kindness saved me. It helped me escape a situation you could not have known about. I never forgot your face, your words, or the way you made me feel human again. I have since rebuilt my life. I now run a foundation dedicated to helping young individuals who carry hearts of gold, like yours. Enclosed is a full scholarship, tuition, housing, books, everything covered. It's my way of saying thank you, and of honoring the young man who unknowingly gave me a second chance at life. With deep gratitude, a friend. Malik's mind spun. His eyes scanned the letter again and again, trying to understand whether he was awake or dreaming. His mother read it too, her trembling fingers brushing over the words. She burst into tears. That night they sat together, in silence, the kind that didn't need words. Their tiny apartment seemed somehow bigger now, filled with something rare. Hope. College opened a new chapter, one that Malik had only seen from afar. He moved into a dorm with cracked windows and a squeaky door, but to him it was a palace. He attended lectures with a hunger that professors quickly noticed. He wasn't the most confident speaker, nor the fastest learner, but what he lacked in polish, he made up for in passion. On weekends he volunteered at soup kitchens, not because it looked good on a resume, but because it reminded him of who he was and how far he'd come. He didn't know the name of the woman who had sent the letter, but her invisible hand guided him every day. He imagined her out there somewhere, smiling, maybe watching his progress from afar. The scholarship covered his needs, but Malik chose to work part-time in the library anyway. Not for the pay, which was modest, but because being around books reminded him of the beginning. The dusty shelves, the quiet corners, the free knowledge that shaped a boy from the slums into someone who dared to dream. One rainy evening, while closing up the library, Malik noticed an older janitor struggling with a mop cart. Without hesitation, he rushed over to help. The man looked at him, surprised. "Not many students help out," the janitor said, his voice rough but kind. Malik smiled. "I used to mop floors too. Feels right to give back." The janitor nodded. "You're gonna do well, kid. Not just smart, but good." Those words echoed in Malik's heart. Not just smart, but good. He realized something that night. Being good wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a tactic. It was a way of being. And somehow it had brought the universe to his doorstep. During his second year, Malik was invited to a charity gala hosted by the very foundation that funded his scholarship. Nervous but grateful, he wore a borrowed suit and clutched his speech notes tightly. The room was filled with towering individuals, CEOs, philanthropists, influencers, and yet, as he took the stage, the only face he saw in his mind was that of the crying woman at the bus stop. He told his story honestly. No embellishments, no dramatics, just truth. He spoke of struggle, of sacrifice, and of the power of small kindnesses. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. And then thunderous applause erupted, cameras flashed, people stood, but Malik wasn't looking for fame. He scanned the crowd for a face he might recognize. He didn't know what she looked like, not really, but a part of him hoped she'd be there. Later that night, as the event ended, a woman in her 40s approached him. Graceful, composed, with kind eyes that held secrets and storms. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked. Malik's heart raced. "You were wearing a red scarf," he said slowly. "You looked lost that night at the bus station?" She smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "I remember everything." They didn't need more words. In that moment, the past and present collapsed into something divine. She hugged him tightly. "Thank you for giving me a reason to live," she whispered. "And thank you for showing me what kindness returns," Malik replied. The city had a certain hush in the early morning, just before the streets began to bustle and the horns began to blare. It was in those moments, while walking to his weekend job, that Liam often felt most connected to the quiet pain that followed him like a shadow. It had been nearly 6 months since he gave up his bus ticket to the woman at the station. A moment that had changed something inside him, not just because he missed his interview that day, but because ever since he couldn't shake the feeling that kindness meant more than success, that compassion could alter the course of a life. Still, real life didn't slow down for philosophy. After missing the interview, Liam had searched desperately for another opportunity, but jobs were scarce and bills never slept. His mother's health continued to worsen. The hospital visits became more frequent, and the medication more expensive. With his part-time work at the grocery store and tutoring neighborhood kids in math, Liam could barely keep up. His grades began to slip, not because he wasn't smart, but because exhaustion had taken up permanent residence in his bones. One rainy afternoon, soaked and shivering, Liam stopped outside the diner where he once used to sit with his mom before. Her illness worsened. He pressed his forehead against the foggy window pane, looking at the warm light inside, the smiling faces, the clinking of coffee cups. It felt like another life. He hadn't stepped inside that place since the hospital visits began, but today he had a few spare coins in his pocket. Not enough for a meal, but maybe a hot coffee. He walked in, shoulders dripping with rain, and the waitress glanced over with tired eyes before softening at the sight of the soaked teenager. "Sit. Anywhere, hon," she said kindly. He nodded and slid into a booth near the back, away from the chatter. He ordered a coffee, black, no sugar, and wrapped his frozen fingers around the mug as soon as it arrived. It felt like holding onto a piece of warmth that he hadn't felt in weeks. As he sat there, staring into the swirling darkness of the cup, a man entered. Well-dressed, clean-shaven, confident. The kind of man Liam could only imagine becoming. The man sat a few tables over, but noticed Liam's drenched hoodie and sunken eyes. There was a flash of recognition in the man's gaze. Not that he knew Liam, but that he understood the look of someone trying to hold it together. A moment passed, and the man stood up and approached. "You all right, son?" he asked gently. Liam looked up, caught off guard. "Yeah, just waiting out the rain," he lied. The man smiled. "Mind if I join you?" And that's how Liam met Thomas Grady, a retired school principal who volunteered at a local community center. They talked about everything from books to broken systems, from dreams to disappointments. Liam didn't know why, but he opened up to the stranger in a way he hadn't to anyone else in months. Maybe it was the warmth in the man's voice, or the way he actually listened. When the rain stopped, Liam stood. "To leave. You've got something special in you, kid," Thomas said as Liam opened the door. "Don't let the world convince you otherwise." It was a simple thing to say, but Liam carried those words for weeks, like a torch in the dark. Back home, the situation continued to decline. His mother's health reached a critical point, and Liam was forced to skip more classes to take care of her. Nurses came in once a week now, and Liam learned to give injections and track symptoms. He cooked, cleaned, studied late into the night, and tried not to cry when she winced in pain. One night, as he sat beside her hospital bed in their tiny living room, his mother took his hand. "Liam, promise me something," she said softly, leaned in. "Promise me you'll live for yourself, too. Not just for me." He choked back tears. "Mom, I don't know how to do that without you." "You will," she whispered. "You already are." She closed her eyes, and Liam sat there, long after she drifted off to sleep, her hand still in his. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hospitals, part-time jobs, and silent nights. It was around this time that Liam received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address, just his name. He opened it slowly. Inside was a note. "Dear Liam, you don't know me, but I know you. Years ago you did something extraordinary. I've been trying to find you ever since. Please meet me at the old train station, 2 p.m. this Friday. You won't regret it." There was no signature. Liam stared at the note for a long time. He thought it was a prank, maybe someone playing with his past. But something inside him, The same instinct that made him give away his bus ticket told him to go. So he did. At exactly 2 p.m. on Friday, he stood at the same station where it had all begun. The same faded benches, the same cracked tiles. Only this time, there was someone waiting for him. A woman in a beige coat holding an umbrella. She turned. Liam's breath caught. He didn't recognize her at first, but then he saw it. The same eyes. The same face, only no longer tear-streaked and desperate. She looked radiant, strong, composed. "Liam?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yes." "I'm the woman you helped that day," she said. "I've never forgotten." He blinked, confused. "I didn't even get your name," he said. "I'm Olivia, and I'm here because you changed my life." She told him everything, how she had been on the verge of losing everything that day, her job, her apartment, her sanity. She'd been on her way to an interview, too, one she would have missed if not for his kindness. That interview? It had landed her a position at a tech startup. That startup? It had exploded. She rose through the ranks. Now she was a partner, wealthy, stable, grateful. Liam was speechless. "I've been searching for you ever since," she said, "and I want to help." He shook his head. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," she replied. "This is a thank you for your soul, for your heart, for believing that a stranger deserved kindness, and because of you, my life turned around." She handed him a folder. Inside, full scholarship to any university of his choice, full medical coverage for his mother, a bank account opened in his name with more than enough to cover all their bills and needs. Liam's hands trembled. I don't know what to say." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You already said it years ago, when you looked at me and gave me hope without needing anything in return." He sat down on the bench, the same bench where he once made a decision that changed 2 lives. And now it was time to change his own. Liam stared at the folder resting in his hands, the weight of its contents sinking in like a stone in still water. The numbers on the bank statement blurred through the tears filling his eyes. But it wasn't the money that made his throat tighten. It was what it represented. For so long, he had been caught in a current of doing, surviving, fighting every day to keep his mother breathing, to keep himself afloat. He had lived with his chin just above the water, never daring to dream beyond the next meal or the next shift. Now, in a twist of fate that seemed almost too poetic to be real, that one act of kindness, giving up his bus ticket to a woman in tears, had come back like a rising tide of hope. And yet, Liam didn't feel triumph. He felt humility. He felt something deeper than gratitude. He felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Olivia stood quietly beside him at the station, watching him process everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't press. She simply let him sit there, a young man on the edge of a new life, trying to understand what it meant to finally be offered a break after a lifetime of struggle. After a long silence, Liam finally looked up at her. "Why me?" he asked softly. Her response came without hesitation. "Because you reminded me that humanity still exists. You didn't know me. You had nothing to gain, but you helped anyway. And that changed my path. You didn't just give me your bus ticket. You gave me a second chance." He nodded slowly, still gripping the folder like it might vanish if he loosened his hold. "I don't know what to do with this," he whispered. Olivia smiled. "Start by believing that you deserve it." Those words struck him like a bell tolling in his chest. Deserve it. He had spent so long measuring his worth against the weight of his burdens. He had forgotten what it meant to believe in possibility, to believe in himself. The days that followed moved like a slow, surreal dream. The first thing Liam did was take his mother to her favorite park, pushing her wheelchair along the paved trail where they used to walk when she was stronger. Her face lit up under the sun, and for the first time in a long while, her laughter rang out like a song he thought he'd forgotten. He told her everything that happened. She cried. Of course she cried. And she kissed his forehead and called him her miracle, though he felt like the miracle had happened to him. Then came the decisions. The scholarship Olivia had arranged was not just generous, it was life-changing. It covered tuition, books, housing, and even living expenses. Liam, who had once rationed rice to make it through the week, was now being offered the freedom to learn, to grow, to focus on his future, without the constant weight of survival pressing on his shoulders. He applied to a respected university in the city, choosing to major in social work with a minor in psychology. He didn't want to chase wealth or status. He wanted to understand people. He wanted to be the kind of person who could lift someone else the way Olivia had lifted him, the way he had tried to lift her on that day at the bus station. The acceptance letter arrived 2 weeks later. He read it aloud to his mother, voice trembling, hands shaking. She cried again, this time with pride radiating from every inch of her tired frame. "You're going to change lives," she said. "You already are." College began in the fall. Liam moved into a modest dorm on campus, Olivia helping him settle in with the quiet care of someone who remembered her own struggles vividly. She didn't hover. She didn't intrude. But she made sure he knew she was there, cheering him on from the sidelines. And Liam, he flourished. He studied like his life depended on it. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. He knew what a gift this was. Every class, every lecture, every page of every book felt like a brick being laid on the foundation of a new future. He made friends. Real ones. People who didn't know him as that poor kid or the one with the sick mom, but simply as Liam, kind, funny, smart, driven. He joined clubs. He volunteered at the local shelter. He started a support group for first-generation students and those struggling with economic hardship. He poured his story into every person he met who needed hope. And slowly, the pain of his past became the fuel for his purpose. Meanwhile, his mother's health stabilized. With proper treatment, rest, and a little joy, she began to regain some of her strength. Liam visited every weekend, cooking her favorite meals and telling her about his classes. They'd sit by the window in the little apartment Olivia helped them secure, watching the world go by as if it finally belonged to them. And then came a day that neither of them expected. It was late in the semester and Liam had been invited to speak at a university event, a panel on overcoming adversity. He hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't his strength, and he wasn't sure anyone wanted to hear the story of a broke teenager who once gave away his only bus ticket. But his advisor, a kind woman named Professor Ellison, encouraged him. "Your story has weight, Liam," she told him. "It's not about being extraordinary. It's about reminding people that kindness matters, that it echoes." So he stood before a packed auditorium, heart pounding, voice shaking, and told his story. About the rainy nights, about his mother, about the hunger, the missed opportunities, and about the crying woman at the bus station, the one who returned years later to give him a new life. The room was silent when he finished, not because they were unimpressed, but because they were moved. Professors, students, strangers, all wiping tears, all standing in ovation, and somewhere in the front row Olivia sat, her hand over her heart, eyes glistening with pride. Afterward, a young woman approached Liam. "I was thinking of dropping out," she whispered, "but after hearing you, I think I'll stay." Liam smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. Then this was all worth it. He walked home that night under a sky full of stars, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from having money or recognition or comfort, but the kind that comes from knowing you lived with integrity, that you gave when you had nothing, and it came back when you needed it most. The world hadn't always been kind to Liam, but in that moment he understood something important. Kindness doesn't always show up on time. Sometimes it circles back years later in the form of a letter, a scholarship, or a second chance. And when it does, it's not just repayment. It's a reminder that we are all connected by invisible threads, choices made in seconds, acts of compassion that ripple through time, returning not always in kind, but in impact. Liam returned to his dorm that night and sat at his desk, pulling out a blank notebook. On the first page, he wrote a title in bold, steady handwriting. The Ripple Effect: Stories of Kindness and Second Chances. He didn't know it yet, but that would become the foundation for the book he'd publish 5 years later. A book that would find its way into schools, shelters, and hearts around the world. And it all began with a bus ticket, a crying woman, and a broke teenager who chose kindness. The seasons shifted, as they always do, slowly dressing the trees in new colors and washing the sky in different moods. Liam had learned to move with them, through the bitter winds of hardship and into the calm of healing. But even in his new chapter, a part of him remained grounded in where he came from, not by fear, not by pain, but by remembrance. He never wanted to forget. As his college journey unfolded, Liam began to notice the way the world around him responded to even the smallest gestures of warmth. A kind word, a helping hand, a shared moment of vulnerability. They sparked connections that no lecture ever could. He began keeping a small notebook, not for homework, but for people, stories, glimpses into the souls of those around him. There was Ava, a classmate who always sat in the back, quiet and hunched under the weight of something she never spoke about, until one rainy afternoon when she saw Liam helping a freshman who had dropped all her books. She stayed after class that day and whispered, "I saw you. Thank you." A few weeks later, she sat beside him and said, "I used to feel invisible. You made me feel seen." Then there was Mr. Carpenter, the janitor who worked the late shift in the dorm buildings. Liam noticed him one night as he dragged his cart through the quiet halls, his movements tired but deliberate. Liam stayed behind after everyone else had left the common area and helped him mop. At first, Mr. Carpenter said nothing, but after a few nights of Liam showing up again and again, he finally said, "No one's ever done that before. Most kids just walk past me like I'm furniture." Liam didn't do it for praise. He did it because it was right, because he knew the ache of being overlooked, because he remembered what it felt like to give and not be given to. His days were full now, with classes, part-time work in the campus library, and weekend visits to his mother. Olivia had become a quiet presence in his life, always near when he needed her, never intruding. They had built something delicate yet steady, not quite a family, but something just as strong. One crisp autumn morning, Liam received an email that made his heart pound against his ribs. It was an invitation to speak at a youth summit hosted by one of the largest nonprofit organizations in the country. They had heard about his talk at the university and read the draft of his upcoming book, which was being quietly edited with the help of a professor who believed in him. They wanted him to share his story with high school students across the state. They wanted him to be a voice for those who didn't know they had one. At first, Liam hesitated. Imposter syndrome crept in like a shadow. Who was he to stand before hundreds of kids and talk like he had the answers? But then he remembered that rainy day, the crying woman, the crumpled ticket, the way she had held his hand, trembling before stepping onto the bus. He remembered Olivia's letter, and how one act of compassion had rewritten the script of his entire life. So he said, yes. The day of the summit arrived like a storm of nerves and excitement. Liam stood backstage, holding the mic in his damp palms, eyes closed as he took slow, measured breaths. When his name was called, he stepped onto the stage to a wave of applause. The lights were warm, blinding, but what anchored him were the faces, dozens of them, young, unsure, curious. He saw himself in them, and then he spoke. He didn't read from a script. He didn't recite polished lines. He told the truth. He spoke of growing up with less than enough, of making choices no child should have to make, of watching his mother's health decline and wondering if he'd survive long enough to see a way out, of the one rainy night at a bus station where, despite having nothing, he gave something that changed everything. And then he spoke of Olivia, of how kindness, like a seed, blooms when nurtured, how it doesn't vanish into thin air. It roots, it grows, it returns. By the end of his speech, the room was silent, not because they were unmoved, but because they were holding their breath. And then slowly, applause erupted like thunder. But it wasn't the clapping that stayed with Liam. It was the line of students who waited afterward just to shake his hand, to hug him, to say, "You made me believe again." In the weeks that followed, Liam's story began to ripple outward. The nonprofit invited him to become a youth ambassador. Local news stations picked up his story. A journalist even published a feature titled, "The Boy Who Gave Away a Bus Ticket and Got a Future in Return." But Liam never let the attention change him. He still worked at the library, still visited his mother every weekend, still walked to class with a notebook in his pocket and kindness in his steps. And then something happened that would once again alter the course of his life. It began with a knock at the door. It was early evening. Liam had just returned from class and was reheating leftovers when he heard it, a soft, unsure knock. He opened the door and found a teenage girl standing there, no older than 16. Her eyes were red, her coat too thin for the chill in the air. "Are you Liam?" she asked, voice cracking. He nodded. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My mom told me to give this to you." He opened it, hands trembling slightly. The handwriting was familiar. He had seen it once before, years ago, in a letter left behind by a woman who vanished after giving him a new life. It was from Olivia, but it wasn't what he expected. It said only this: "If you're reading this, something may have happened to me, but I need you to know. You're not alone, and neither is she. Please help her the way you helped me." The girl stared at him, tears brimming. "She was in an accident. They said she didn't make it." The words hit like a blow to the chest. Olivia? Gone? Liam felt the world tilt beneath him, but he steadied himself for the girl, Olivia's daughter. He brought her inside, made her tea, asked her name. Emily. She had no other family, no place to go. Her mother had shielded her from the world's worst parts, but now that shield was gone. And once again, Liam found himself at a crossroads. He looked at the girl, scared, alone, trembling in a stranger's living room. And he remembered. He remembered being 16 and cold and desperate, waiting at a bus stop with no way forward. So he did what Olivia had done for him. He gave her a home. It wasn't much, a small apartment shared now by two, but it was safe and warm and kind. He became her guardian. He enrolled her in school. He helped her grieve. He listened. He cooked. He made space for silence and space for tears, and slowly Emily began to bloom. Liam didn't do it because he felt obligated. He did it because he had been given a second chance. And now, it was his turn to pass it on. Liam sat quietly in his small apartment late into the night, the soft hum of the city outside mixing with the slow rhythm of his breath. The weight of the past years, the countless twists and turns his life had taken, all seemed to converge in this one moment. He thought about the bus ticket he gave away all those years ago. Such a simple gesture, yet one that changed everything. How a small act of kindness could echo through time and ripple into futures he never imagined. Emily, now living under his roof, had slowly become more than just the girl he helped. She was family. A fragile thread woven into the fabric of his life, a reminder that love often comes from the unlikeliest places. They had both been lost at some point, and now together they were finding their way. The days that followed were filled with challenges, but also with quiet victories. Helping Emily settle into school, finding her the support she needed, was no easy task. There were hurdles, awkward conversations, moments when both of them felt like giving up. But they didn't, because they understood what it meant to have someone believe in you. One afternoon, as Liam was returning from work, He found a letter slipped under his door. It was from a lawyer, an official-looking envelope bearing Olivia's name. His hands trembled as he carefully opened it, the words inside shaking his heart. "Dear Liam, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you in this world, but my spirit lives on through you and Emily. I want you to know that the past few years I saved and invested in a small property, hoping one day it could provide security and a new beginning for you both. You have shown kindness beyond measure, and now it is time for you to receive the same. Please find enclosed the deeds to a house. It's not much, but it is yours. With all my love, Olivia." The room felt suddenly warm despite the cold night. Outside, Liam read and reread the letter, tears blurring the words. Olivia had left behind a legacy, not just in words but in bricks and mortar, a home. It was the final piece of a puzzle that had begun with a bus ticket, a shared moment of humanity between two strangers. The next weeks were a whirlwind. Liam and Emily moved into the modest house on the edge of town. It wasn't a mansion, but, to them, it was a castle, a symbol of hope, hard work, and the power of kindness. Liam's story began to inspire others far beyond his circle. Schools invited him to speak about compassion and resilience. Communities reached out, eager to learn how a simple act could spark life-changing journeys. But for Liam, the greatest reward was seeing Emily thrive, watching her laughter fill the Isvitaho halls, her confidence grow, and knowing that despite all the darkness they had faced, light was always possible. Years passed, and Liam graduated with honors. Emily pursued her own dreams with fierce determination. And together, they built a life that no longer centered on survival, but on giving back, on creating spaces where others could find refuge and encouragement. Looking back, Liam understood something profound, that the true value of kindness is not in grand gestures, but in small, steady acts that build bridges. The bus ticket he gave on a rainy night wasn't just a gift, it was a promise, a seed that blossomed into a garden of hope. And as he stood on the porch of his new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors of possibility, Liam smiled, because he knew the story was far from over. It was only just beginning.